In 1991, the small Arab state of Kuwait was at the center of the last major war of the 20th century. Saddam Hussein's Iraq had invaded Kuwait, putting nearly half the world's oil within his reach.
Virtually everyone agreed he had to be stopped.
Over 1 million troops faced each other across the battlefield.
Revolutionary new technology like stealth bombers, cruise missiles, and precision-guided bombs would make this a battle unlike anything anyone had seen before.
I'll be getting to grips with some of the challenges faced by the men and women on the front line in this new era of warfare.
And I'll show how the commanders chose their tactics in a war dominated by cutting-edge technology and ruthless political calculation.
With his seizure of Kuwait, Saddam Hussein threatened to hold the whole world to ransom. He warned that the fight that would follow would be the mother of all battles. Everything would now depend on the outcome of Operation Desert Storm, the battle for Kuwait.
In the early hours of August 2nd, 1990, Iraq's army shocked the world by invading its neighbor, Kuwait.
They smashed through the defenses on the border and headed straight down this road towards the capital, Kuwait City. Kuwait's tiny army was unable to mount any serious resistance.
Thousands of Iraqi troops were soon swarming through the capital.
At around 4:30 a.m., just hours after the start of the invasion, Iraqi troops arrived here at the Parliament building. The guards were taken completely by surprise, and within minutes, Kuwait's parliament had been captured.
The ruler of Kuwait, the emir, along with most of the royal princes, abandoned their palaces and fled. By the end of the day, the entire country of Kuwait was completely overrun, as thousands of Iraqi troops continued to pour across the border. And they were all obeying the orders of one man, Saddam Hussein.
Saddam Hussein was the president of Iraq and a brutal dictator. For 11 years, he had enforced a violent regime that murdered and tortured without hesitation. He'd built up the fourth largest army in the world, with over 1 million troops. But his regime was in serious trouble. Not least because an 8-year war with his neighbor Iran had left him with a mountain of debt.
Iraq was bankrupt. Saddam had to come up with a solution to his cash crisis, and it lay across the border here in Kuwait. This is Iraq, and here is Kuwait. Kuwait is almost floating on oil. Outside the capital, Kuwait City, oil wells cover much of the country. To the north, there are oil fields on the border with Iraq. Here in the center, the Burgan oil field is the second largest in the world. Altogether, Kuwait held 10% of the world's oil, and it was this vast wealth that Saddam had captured. Together with the Iraqi oil fields that Saddam already owned, he now had control of over 1/5 of the world's oil reserves. Saddam gambled that Western leaders did not have the stomach for a Middle East war and would have to accept his occupation of Kuwait. But he was in for a rude shock.
This will not stand. This will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait.
What has happened is a total violation of international law.
Please raise their hand.
The United Nations condemned the invasion and called on Saddam to withdraw his troops from Kuwait. But far from withdrawing, there were signs that he might be planning something even bigger. Thousands of Iraqi reinforcements were moving into Kuwait. Some set up defensive positions along the coastline. But most worrying for global leaders was the large number of troops and tanks driving right down through the country and massing on its southern border. The question was, would they stop there? 200 miles south of the border was the richest concentration of oil wells in the world. The oil fields of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi army was small. If Saddam chose to attack now, there was nothing to stop him. If he seized Saudi Arabia's wells, he would control nearly half the world's oil. President Bush Sr. and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher were determined to stop him. They were convinced that the only way to protect Saudi Arabia and its oil was to put US and British troops in on the ground. But there was a huge problem.
Saudi Arabia is the spiritual home of Islam. It contains the cities of Mecca and Medina, the most holy sites in the Muslim world.
Its royal family ran the country according to strict Islamic laws. Any attempt to fly in tens of thousands of troops from the non-Muslim armies of Britain and America was a political minefield.
On August the 6th, 1990, just 4 days after Iraq had invaded Kuwait, a top-rank White House team flew to Saudi Arabia to meet King Fahd. They offered to fly in thousands of US troops to defend the kingdom.
King Fahd knew his meager forces couldn't stop Saddam Hussein if he chose to invade. And so, despite the risk of huge anger from devout Muslims, he immediately gave the Americans the invitation they wanted.
Within hours, one of the biggest deployments of troops since World War II was underway.
More than 250,000 American and British troops from bases in the US and Europe headed for the deserts of the Middle East. The Americans and British were determined that their stand against Saddam Hussein should be seen as an international operation and not as an American-led attack on an Arab country.
In the coming months, troops from over 30 countries would take their place alongside the Americans and British in the Saudi Arabian desert. It was an extraordinary coalition that even included several Arab states like Egypt and Syria. But it was the Americans that dominated.
The man in charge was called General Norman Schwarzkopf.
He was a giant of a man with a keen intellect. He also had a fiery temper, and he set the tone with one of his first public comments about Saddam Hussein.
If he dares come across that border and come down here, I'm completely confident that we're going to kick his butt when he gets here.
Schwarzkopf was a tough talker, but he knew he faced a mammoth task.
the troops had been trained to go into battle on the green rolling hills of Europe. They arrived to find a scorched, barren desert like this one. It was a place few of them had ever imagined they'd have to fight over.